Have you ever been in the situation of having a baby and having this well-laid plan of establishing breastfeeding, taking a few weeks to get settled into the idea, and then beginning to pump so you can store up a stash for while you're at work? And then once you have that baby and you've started breastfeeding, you realize that that baby has to eat between 8 and 12 times a day or more. And how in the world are you going to fit in pumping on top of that when you have other tasks you need to do? So you work so hard to get pumping established and to get your milk supply going. And then you think everything's fine. And then you start to pass the 8, the 9, the 10, the 11, the 12-week mark. And suddenly you have a huge dip in your supply. You're not producing enough to feed your baby, and you have to start supplementing or worrying about increasing your supply, and you don't know how you got here in the first place. Let's talk about the dip, the 12-week supply dip, and why it happens and what you can do, A, to prevent it, and B, to increase your supply if you've already gotten to this point. Have you ever stopped to consider why so many humans struggle to feed human milk to their human babies in recent history? Have you then looked around and noticed that so few animals in the animal kingdom struggle to do the same? My name is Lo Nigrosh. I am an internationally board-certified lactation consultant, or an IBCLC, and a childbirth educator, and I have been thinking about this for a long time. Come uncover the barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult, so that one podcast episode at a time, we chip away at these barriers and make breastfeeding easier for everyone. I just want to start by saying this is one of the biggest barriers to human milk feeding that there is. And here's why. Because if you are lucky and you live either in a state that has some sort of mandated federal medical leave act, which is rare, or you work for a company that provides some sort of paid parental leave, then you might get 8 weeks, 12 weeks, sometimes more if you use your sick leave or your paid time off to be able to start the postpartum period and establish your milk supply and care for your baby before returning to work. All of this while healing from pregnancy and birth, while learning how to care for a new human being, and while working really hard to get feeding your baby off to a great start, which for many people now can take quite a long time to get it all worked out. So then, by the time you do get it all worked out, it's suddenly time to return to work. And here's how milk supply works. Once you pass about the 14th, 15th, 16th week of pregnancy, then your body automatically begins creating milk. And that's that colostrum that you see in the beginning stages of birth. The delivery of the placenta is the signaler for the body to start releasing that colostrum. The hormone that starts creating that milk in the first place in those early weeks of pregnancy is prolactin. But your body during pregnancy has high levels of estrogen and progesterone and other pregnancy hormones that suppress that prolactin. But once you deliver the placenta, those pregnancy hormones drop, and that's why the prolactin is able to rise, and then the oxytocin helps release the milk out of your body. And so that's all happening regardless of what you do. But then over time, we have this supply and demand control of breast milk. And that is when the milk supply over time switches from this endocrine control to autocrine control. And it doesn't happen overnight. So it's not as if the minute your mature milk comes in, you're now on autocrine control. That's why so many people can produce a lot of milk for their babies until about the 12-week mark. And then we lactation consultants often get called around the 10-week mark, 11-week mark, 12-week mark, because suddenly people are noticing a drop in their supply. This is because that's about the time this final transition from endocrine control, just having the hormonal surges in your body in the postpartum period, switches fully over to autocrine control, providing the amount of milk you need based on how much milk is being released. And so, what are the reasons we start to see milk supply drop around the 12-week period? If a person, for instance, has been trading off with their partner and getting longer stretches of sleep at night and not removing milk in the middle of the night, then the body is going to down regulate to that pattern. You've heard me now for a few months talking about how much I've enjoyed getting home cooked meals delivered right to my front door from feastandfettle.com. And I'm here today to tell you that if you know somebody who is in the postpartum period, who you would like to provide true support to, that you should go to feastandfettle.com and order home-cooked meals to be delivered right to their front door. One of the biggest barriers to breastfeeding success is a lack of support. A new parent is feeding a baby up to 15 times a day. How on earth do we expect that person to feed that baby that many times, also feed themselves, and provide meals to other members of their family? There's not enough time. You know how hard it is as a busy parent yourself to try to put meals on the table. Go to feastandfettle.com, use my code MILK, M-I-L-K, coordinate which meals they would like to have delivered, and send them a week's worth of delicious meals. And be the person who eases the burden for them. What a gift. I can't think of a better way to support somebody in the postpartum period. So if you once had a lot of milk, but you have not been removing milk as consistently as what the baby needs to eat, then over time that supply is going to dip. And when your body fully switches over to that autocrine control, sometimes we see big dips, and we might see babies dropping off their growth curve, or we might see pump output reduce. And that is often because of this switch in the hormones. Another reason we start to see this drop in the ability to feed babies fully from their bodies is when people start to attempt sleep training. And I say this recognizing that none of us are getting enough support in the day or the night to fully function throughout the day and get everything done that we need to get done as parents caring for one baby, multiple children, working and caring for children. So some people sleep train out of a necessity for their own health, for their mental health, and for their ability to accomplish the things they need to accomplish during the day. However, biology doesn't care about that. And we evolved in these large social groups where we had lots of people helping us, and we did not get as little sleep as we get now. We also evolved to sleep with our babies. And our modern sleeping situations often dictate that we put the baby on a different sleeping surface. If you have a really soft mattress, if you use lots of comforters and you're not willing to change that, if you have pillows, if your bed is really high. In the newborn stage, it doesn't matter as much, but once your baby starts rolling around, that bed needs to get lowered to the ground. So there are lots of reasons why sleeping with our babies can be unsafe. It can be very safe, and Dr. James McKenna of the Notre Dame Mother Baby Sleep Center has lots of information about how to make sleeping with our babies safe so that we can fulfill that biological norm and help our milk supply. But if babies are being wrapped up tightly in another surface, if they're being swaddled, or if they are sleeping out of distance from their parents and they are not stirring as regularly to show their earliest hunger signals, then that might mean that the number of feeds gets spread out during the night and the milk supply decreases. Because if you think about milk supply, as you should, on a 24-hour clock, this means that if you sleep for 8 hours a night or 10 hours a night and you're only feeding baby once in that time, that is a huge reduction in the number of feeds, and that can lead to reduction in milk supply. So, what can you do about this? If you are experiencing a reduction in milk supply around the 12-week mark, here are my suggestions as an IBCLC. Now, I want to give a caveat that I don't know your individual situation. I don't know your work schedule. I don't know your partner's work schedule. I don't know if you're single parenting. I don't know if you have grandparents that can help you. I don't know if your baby is in childcare. I don't know what your phalange sizes are and how you're using your pump settings. So there is a lot that goes into milk supply. And if you would like to have an individual consult, you and me, where I learn all of those factors that are making feeding your baby on a 24-hour cycle challenging, and it is leading to a reduction in milk supply, I would be so happy to meet with you individually over telehealth or in person if you live close to me, and to help you figure this out, because there are ways to mitigate this, knowing that we have this cultural barrier. The first is to just go back to thinking of your milk supply on a 24-hour cycle. And you really want to ensure that your baby is feeding a minimum of 8 times a day. Often, it's going to be more. If you have a small storage capacity, which, by the way, has nothing to do with your breast size, and we can't control what our storage capacity is. We can control how much milk we make in a 24-hour cycle, but we cannot control how much milk our breasts will hold in any given time. So if you have a smaller storage capacity, that means that your baby will probably take more frequent feeds and ingest smaller volumes at a time. So depending on your storage capacity, you might be feeding baby a minimum of 8 times a day, or you might be feeding baby 12 or 15 times a day, or sometimes more. Although if we start to see lots of feeds like that, then I start to wonder what is going on in the baby's mouth that is making it difficult for them to ingest larger volumes of milk. So go back to thinking about your milk supply on a 24-hour clock and add in some extra feeds or extra milk removal. So if you have a baby that is sleeping really well, and they're sleeping for long stretches, and that means that you have eliminated some of the night feedings, you can, do some dream feeding. If your baby goes to sleep on the early side and then you're up for a couple of more hours and then you go to sleep, you could pick up your baby, give them a dream feed where you don't wake them up, but you just latch them and let them remove some milk by feeding, and then put them back in their sleeping space, still asleep, and you might start to see a supply increase by that. You may need to add in an extra pumping session if you are unwilling to try some dream feeding with your baby, if you're worried about increasing your milk supply. So this might be a pumping session right before you go to bed. You may need to wake up and do a quick pump in the middle of the night. If you're unwilling to do that, even just waking up a bit earlier and having a pumping session before your baby wakes up can often be enough to increase the milk supply, just having that 1 or 2 extra times when you're removing milk. If you are able to, on the weekends when you're not as busy or on days when you're not as busy, spend a lot of time skin to skin with your baby, giving them the opportunity to nurse more frequently, and having these intermittent days of increased nursing, especially if it's regular, once or twice a week, might be enough to increase your milk supply. But if you are feeding 8 or less times a day and you are noticing a dip in your milk supply around the 12-week mark, the way to increase that milk supply is not by buying a bunch of galactagogues. It is not by eating more oatmeal. Of course, if you love oatmeal, eat it. It is not by ordering lactation cookies or making them yourself. You are going to see very minimal, if any, results from focusing on the food you eat. And you will see much better results by ensuring that your baby has a good deep latch, is transferring milk at the breast, and making sure to increase the number of milk removals either with the baby or with the pump. The other caveat I'm going to add to this is if you have not done a phalange fitting with somebody who knows what they are doing, I highly recommend that you do this, that you get your phalanges fitted and that you work with your lactation consultant on the pump settings that you are using so that you can optimize your milk removal with the pump. The other thing that I will add is if you have something like a Haka or the Haka ladybug and you are noticing a dip in your supply, that might be the time to get that out and see if stimulating the non-nursing side while your baby nurses is enough to increase that supply. You may also add in some hand expression. So hand expression is a really great thing to do when you don't have a lot of time, and it can have a lot of impact on the amount of milk you're able to express. So adding in some hand expression just throughout the day is a great way to just get your body signaling that it needs to make more milk. That's going to get prolactin flowing through your body and allow you to increase your milk supply. Francie Webb, she is the founder of Go Milk Yourself. She was on my podcast twice, once to tell her own personal baby feeding story and another time to talk specifically about hand expression. I will link that in the show notes, but that is another way to increase your milk supply over time. So if you are in this situation and you're needing a consult, please reach out, www.quabandbirthservices.com, or find me on my socials, all linked in the show notes. I would be so happy to create an individual plan for you that makes sense for your schedule and your responsibilities, because we have to balance increasing our supply with what we are able to do as a human being who also has to meet our own needs. And one other way to have more time for pumping or for feeding your baby is to go to feastandfettle.com to use my code MILK, M-I-L-K, and get $30 off your first order. If you live in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, Connecticut, or New Hampshire, this is a great way to feed your family, to feel good about the food that they're eating, and to also take something off your own plate. There is no way that one person can be responsible for feeding all the people in a house. So why don't you get some help? Get somebody else to do the cooking for you. Talk to you soon. Bye.